In a week where creative nonfiction reached its Kickstarter goal to support its monthly offshoot, True Story, what better than to have the latest True Story author on the show? I'm your host, Brendan O'Mara, and this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak with leaders in narrative journalism, essay, memoir, radio, and documentary film, and try to extract those stories, habits, and routines so that you can apply their tools of mastery to your own work. And for episode 76, I welcome Erica Berry. She's an essayist, journalist, and eavesdropper. She's a liberal arts fellow and MFA candidate in creative nonfiction at the University of Minnesota. She spent 9 months at the Annatascalanza, probably pronouncing that wrong too, cooking school in rural Sicily, co-producing a documentary about endangered culinary traditions. Now she's working on a book of essays about fear. And that's kind of what brought her here today. Not fear of the podcast. This is a safe place after all, but the fear she courted in Beasts Among Us, her true story about the myth of the werewolf. It's a chilling tale that feeds off local war. Did I say war? Local lore. Anyway, and it's Erica's own visit to the town where people swear they saw the man wolf. And to start off the podcast, I have a treat. But first, a little housekeeping. I'm still offering a free hour of editing or / coaching for a piece of your writing. All you have to do is leave an honest review. Notice I didn't even say a nice review of the podcast on iTunes. Take a screenshot that also shows the date of your review and email that to me. Anything postmarked from November 2017 to the end of 2017 is eligible. It's my way of saying thank you. One friendly Canadian has already redeemed the gift, and I hope dozens, if not more, of you will as well. So Erica was gracious enough to read from the first section of her story, Beasts Among Us. So we're going to ease into that. And warning, the hairs on your arms might stand up.
So this is the beginning of Beasts Among Us. Mark Shackleman was in his early 30s, a night watchman at the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children on the outskirts of Jefferson, Wisconsin, when he saw the beast. It was 1936. The home for developmentally disabled youth included a former Franciscan convent. Its sprawling grounds comprised orchards, gardens, a religious sanctuary, stone buildings the color of old teeth, and, allegedly, several Native American burial mounds. This whole swath of southern Wisconsin is filled with animal-shaped burial mounds, which date back as far as 500 BCE. An estimated 80% of the mounds are now gone, built over or plowed under like the bird that appears to have once had a quarter-mile wingspan near the Wisconsin River, not far from present-day Muskota. Still, according to the state's Department of Natural Resources, this region is America's hub of effigy mound culture. To Linda Godfrey, the Wisconsin cryptozoologist and reporter who wrote about Shackleman's sighting, the mounds are astounding, and their proximity to the sighting always seemed more than coincidental. Shackleman was out walking the grounds a bit before midnight when he saw it, a shaggy dog-faced creature with a muscular human torso. It was kneeling on one of the mounds, digging into the mussed earth. Slowly, Shackleman backed away. The creature, too, backed away. At some point it ran, but it ran like a man, 2 paws on the ground, 2 in the night air. Shackleman was a heavyweight boxer. He was also a devout Catholic who rarely went to the movies. That is to say, Werewolf of London had come out a year earlier, but who knows if he saw it. What he did see, when he went back to the mound the next morning, was the earth torn by the rake of claws, the echo of a beast. That night, during his daily rounds, he returned to the area. Again midnight, but he was carrying a flashlight like a club. Again the creature, and now it stood up to greet him. It was covered in thick, dark hair and smelled like long, dead meat. It had fangs and was over 6 feet tall. Its thumb and forefinger seemed shrunken so that it appeared to have only 3 fingers. It looked him in the eye and offered him a 3-syllable lump of noise, something between human speech and animal growl. Shackleman began to pray to God. He saw the creature sneer at him, and then he saw it start to back away. He prayed again, this time, thank you. Even after the beast was gone, its dead smell stained the night. Later, Shackleman told the story to his wife, and then he swept up his words and made her promise to keep them secret. That, for a while, was that.
Oh, man, it's like hearing you read it, reading it myself and then hearing you read it, it feels like something out of Edgar Allan Poe.
Thank you. That's a real honor to be compared. Yeah, it's like a fun thing to be trying to create. I mean, in my mind, it is this creepy thing, and I never even went there. Or, when you're writing something like this, that's all from sort of testimony and then the way that other people have written about it. And then, you do all the research you can to build the scene. But that it's always great to hear that there's those scraps of what is haunted comes through the page.
So what's also really, really great about this story too is like, and it's something I'm deeply drawn to as a writer, is like these obsessive people, like so Linda Godfrey, she's this woman who is from lives in that region and like really immersed herself in these like weird creatures and specifically these werewolf sightings. And,
right.
It's so cool to see you expand on this obsessive personality, but also going there, getting the Airbnb and trying to, wrap your mind around it. So how did you arrive at this particular story? Yeah,
I think, I am drawn to obsessive people. I mean, maybe that's just my way of being, obsessive as a writer. And so I'm writing this book of essays that are about fear loosely, but there's sort of the theme of the wolf, or the figure of the wolf, sort of threads in and out of them. I was studying the wolf from an environmental studies standpoint as an undergraduate. It's being reintroduced to Oregon, super controversial. And I sort of realized the wolf was this vessel, for so many different sorts of fears and anxieties about how humans like relate to the natural world and to each other. So I've got my ears like always sort of perked up for wolf related things. And when I heard about this, I really just I forget even how I stumbled on it, but sort of hearing that this catalyst of werewolf myths was like not far from where I'm living in the Twin Cities right now. And I just sort of had that like, well, what would happen if I went? Somewhere online described it as like Roswell, New Mexico, in the UFO way, but for werewolves. And I think that was a past tense description. Like it's very much not like that now. But I was just like on a gut level, pretty curious what would be like over there, and whether there was a sense of like fear related to. I didn't quite know what the fear would be about this creature that people couldn't make sense of. And that was one of the things that was interesting to parse in the piece, is there's like there's this sort of like psychologic unrest as much as, an unrest about what would actually be in the forest.
What was that first meeting like when you met Linda, this person who writes a lot about this stuff? So you saw her in print, and then you get to meet this person who's writing about these myths and this kind of fear and local lore. So what was that experience like when you met her face to face?
Yeah, it was really, I think I wasn't sure, honestly, where she fell on like, if she, the way she wrote about it a long time ago was that she didn't believe these stories, right? She was just a journalist who went in to follow up. Why were people seeing these, dog human creatures? And then she slowly sort of like came to believe that she believed these people, right? And that belief was more important than any sort of like scientific logic or rationale for her. And so I was sort of struck pretty quickly in the conversation by the parallels between us. Like both of us were kind of had come into this with like a sense of skepticism, right, from the rational world. And, to this day, I don't believe that there are like werewolf creatures. But I didn't want that to somehow like disvalue what the belief that both she had in the witnesses and that I had in her own, dedication to this story. Like that was really interesting to me. And so the sort of similarity between the way that we both thought of this almost anthropologically pretty quickly became clear. And I felt just a real empathy and like joy talking to her, which is one of the things, I always feel often with sources. Joan Didion said, writers are always selling people out. And I just have like chafed against that a good amount, I think, because I don't feel like I want to be.
So what hooked you about this to invest your time and resources to go to this city, this little town, and try to unearth something? What brought you there?
I think there was a level of challenge. People don't, she quotes in one of her introductions to one of her books, whatever, I'm totally blanking on the line, but that thing about like, if you lie down with the dogs, you're rolling with the fleas, right? And like writing about supernatural creatures, cryptozoology, like you're covered in fleas. And I think the challenge of writing something like that felt really interesting. Like there's a certain point where I go in and I say, for example, like I tell my Airbnb host, I'm here to talk about werewolves. And there's like an immediate sort of guard goes down and skepticism. And it was interesting because I'd never, I'm not a cryptozoologist. Like I also have that skepticism, but I was sort of interested just to like, this is the stigmatized story. And I guess I wanted the challenge of being able to present it in a way that like, other people on the outside wouldn't close their blinders and be like, this is about cryptozoology. This is not real. I don't have a way to relate to this story. And I would think I had read some stories. There was an atavist story last year about fires that seemed to be starting spontaneously in Sicily. I should find the name of that story, but I was really captivated by it. I'd lived in Sicily for a while and was just interested in this sort of, the structure of the story of like, here's this thing that's unexplained. And what is the reporter's job is sort of in that sense, like an old fashioned detective. I grew up like loving Nancy Drew obsessively and appreciating the writer's role as someone who's just going to go in and be curious and like listen, which I think was appealing about this piece immediately.
So what was the challenge of pursuing a story of this nature where, you're in essence kind of trying to explain an unexplainable phenomenon? And the understanding in the end is that you're not going to be like face to face with the werewolf or something, but instead it's still a compelling read. So what was that challenge and kind of teasing out the possibility of through all these stories of seeing it, but also just knowing ultimately that it's not like Erica Berry is going to be, seeing it through her eyeglasses or something. So like, I don't know. What was that challenge of explaining that unexplainable? Yeah.
I think at first, I thought, I'm going to talk to the witnesses. Like I want to hear it through their words. I want to try to make sense. I want to witness their witnessing,
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of had this list and I started tracking them down and I really went to the public library there and, was like getting phone records and I'm sort of a combination of what happens, which is like loose ends and to not overlapping schedules. And someone had just gotten out of surgery. And I pretty quickly just realized, and I was meeting with Linda and suddenly it was like, well, Linda is really like the magnifying glass or that's maybe the wrong metaphor, but like all of these stories have come through her. And so in some ways, like talking to this disseminator, like I'm witnessing her. And she's the one who has witnessed these people who have witnessed this creature. And Linda hadn't seen it either. So she and I became these interesting sort of like studiers of the story in some way, but I was also studying her. And that started to feel then more interesting. Like there was a point where I realized, I'm not going to figure out what these witnesses felt really. And that's not just like I'm not going to find the beast.
You're kind of alluding to it, I think. How did you go into or enter this project, or what expectations did you have going in? And then how did you pivot from what you were maybe hoping to see and report on versus what you actually filled up recorders and notebooks with that informed the writing ultimately?
Yeah, I think, it's so helpful to have a model piece when you go into working on something like this, especially in, creative nonfiction where I'm not always sure because I've worked more hardline journalism and I've worked more hardline personal essay, and like this sort of breed of a little bit of both. The balance, I'm never quite sure what it's going to be when I go into it. I didn't have this lined up for where I was going to publish it or anything. So I didn't know quite who I was writing for per se. So I did have a model though that felt like this was like this sort of tone. And it was Leslie Jamison's The Devil's Bait, which ran in Harper's and then was in her collection, The Empathy Exams. And she basically goes to a conference for people who believe they have Morgellons disease or Morgellons, which is like little worms coming out of your skin, is sort of the gist of this. And she is at this conference center and she spends a weekend there and she's just talking to them and getting to know them. And she previously had a past experience where she'd had a Bolivian botfly in her ankle. And so she sort of could associate with some of the compulsion. And this is this disease that's totally unrecognized by doctors and sort of scoffed at. And, one of the things that she comes to by the end of the essay, she says, like, I can't really tell these people that I believe in this disease. I mean, I'm oversimplifying her words, but she's walking a very fine line of like, I really want to have a lot of like, believe that their pain is real and believe that what they're seeing is real to them and that it's causing them suffering, but maybe this disease, right, like isn't real. And that was like a helpful sort of model of even the journalistic empathy that I was going to bring in, which even when I later learned, I'm not going to be talking to these witnesses, I still felt like I wanted to like preserve some sense. I think I could have gone into the story and just assumed everyone's bored. It's a small town in the Midwest. Like people are going to see these things for kicks, right? And there is an element of like, people are dressing up like teenage boys, dressing up like werewolves, and sitting on this road for Halloween, or like, there was an element of that. But I think I wanted to believe that there was also something more deeply like resonant and powerful about this thing that people were seeing, and, not just assuming this was people. I mean, there's an element of entertainment, but also something deeper.
Do you think this story appealed to you in part because growing up in the Pacific Northwest, there's, of course, the Sasquatch myth, and there are untold people here who swear by it. And I wonder if maybe just that growing up with that mythology in your out of the box software, if that helped sort of inform your curiosity in this particular tale.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely had a level of interest, and I would say this sort of extends to religion too. Linda Godfrey later spoke about like her own belief. She's Lutheran, and spoke about how her belief in God, she thought sort of like was tandem to her belief in these creatures ultimately. And like, why do we judge people, one sort of people's belief, and honor another sort of people's belief, was sort of her thing she was saying about that. And I think, I'm not personally religious, and I don't think I've ever maybe sort of had a short-lived belief in Sasquatch or something, but I did always get the sense, like I had relatives who would tell these stories about, ghosts in some old haunted hotel in Montana. And it's like, I would be looking in their eyes and they would 100% feel it was real. And that was what was interesting. And so, yeah, I think that sense of like conviction and feeling like that was a really interesting thing that I personally didn't have. I'm just like, I'm a Libra. I'm always doubting things, like it was like, anyone who can speak with that sort of conviction about something that they think they've seen, like I have so little of that personally that I was really drawn to that in other people.
And as you were leaving the town, with having done your research and your interviews and having sort of immersed yourself in that, and what was maybe the self-talk you were telling yourself as you were leaving and driving away? As you were trying to process everything that you had just seen and heard, like what were you telling yourself as you were getting ready to synthesize all your research into what ends up being just this really, really great story you tell?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, the word essayer in French means to try. And I feel like so much of in that phase was just like having this constellation of quotes and things that felt interesting and surprising. I wasn't expecting Linda to talk about her religion. I wasn't expecting her to talk about all the other things in the forest that scared her, not this creature, you know? And so it's like you sort of had this constellation of things. And I was just really like trying to figure out what the sort of beating heart of the essay was going to be. I mean, I think sometimes I know when I'm writing, and this one, I really wasn't totally sure. And part of that is that a lot of the things that crystallized about the piece for me were when I had these other sort of layers of historical knowledge about the place. So, you know, when I went to the library sort of at the end of my trip and I saw that, oh, the same week that this werewolf had there'd been coverage of that in the paper, the KKK had been having a resurgence. And that was a certain click for me of helping to, you know, I love doing historical research and helping to contextualize, like, what would the mindset have been of this person who was experiencing this thing that I'm writing about? Like, it's always helpful to sort of have that peripheral landscape knowledge. And when I heard about the KKK, like, that was really helpful in being like, oh yeah, there is this other thing that people are uneasy about that is emerging at night. And like, how is that not related? It felt so obviously related in some way. And then when I got home, that was when I found out that this Kennedy daughter, Rosemary Kennedy, was actually at this home in the same county where this first sighting had been. And, you know, she was very sad. She was there after a failed lobotomy, but I mean, the lobotomy wasn't even legitimate in the first place. Her parents had sort of ordered it. And this is an incredibly devastating story. And those other sorts of sadness just started looming larger. Like, as much as I was writing about a supernatural thing, suddenly, you know, the other secrets or things about a place that are just the everyday sadnesses, like, felt like they were just getting bigger. And like, actually, those were the things that I was starting to understand about this place. And the werewolf was related to those for sure. But once I had those other layers of research, the narrative started shifting for me.
How long did you maybe stew on the material before you started diving into the actual writing?
Well, I will say that I was writing this first round for a workshop, and I just had to write it. It was like one of those deadline things where, you know, I can't remember exactly how much time, but it was like basically within 2 weeks of coming back, I think I'd finished a draft. And I'm a pretty bingy writer. Like, I would like to maybe be the person that just writes in even like 4 hours every morning and then like reads, not, you know, but I tend to like go all in. And I wrote like the bulk of this first draft, not just because of the deadline, but I think my own obsessiveness. Like, I wrote it just over most of a day in a coffee shop, or I wrote a large chunk of it. And then sort of continuously, it was sort of this one weekend that was just like, you know, there was one immersive weekend of research. And then like the next immersive weekend was just like writing this piece, or writing the first draft of it, which was different from the version that was published ultimately. But
given that the tone or the heart of the piece changed based on some of the extra reading and research you did after the initial reporting on scene, when did this piece finally feel finished? And how, you know what I mean? Like, because maybe you could have read something else that might have changed the tint of it again. So at what point? So at what point did you feel confident that I've found it? This is the theme I'm running with. Yeah,
that's a very good question. You know, I think I'm thinking about like so there's a sort of silver bullet thread that comes throughout. And that was a later research thread where, so I was reading this other book on the side about this sort of monstrous, it's called The Beast of Gévaudan, this creature in medieval France, basically, that was presumed to be a wolf, but it killed more people than like we can ever imagine a wolf killing sort of in our contemporary, it was just basically an anomaly. Anyway, there's a great book about this. And I was reading sort of the histories, and the book is actually saying like, why did people believe in this thing, and looking at the cultural context, not like trying to figure out what this wolf was. So that was also an interesting, helpful model. And reading about it, and eventually this wolf had been killed, hypothetically, with a bullet that was said to have been like carved from a Virgin Mary coin. It was this sort of whole mythical story. I sort of forget the detail. It's in the book, or it's in the essay. And so that was like the root of this myth of the silver bullet, was that the silver bullet could kill, right, this mythical monster. And then the silver bullet, like I found, so I tried to get police reports from the Beast of Bray Road. There was a guy who was arrested for having a gun on this road, and he said he was werewolf hunting, but it seemed like maybe he was out to get an old boss. Anyway, I'd gone to the police station and I'd totally gotten dead ends when I was actually in Wisconsin. And I sort of thought, I don't know what I'm going to get from this. But then later, like in the mail, they did send me the reports of this guy's arrest. And, later I was finding out that once he was on trial, testing him for like his werewolf belief, the silver bullet came into that conversation too. They were like, oh, if you really had a gun for hunting werewolves, like, wouldn't you have had a silver bullet? And the actual bullets were like investigated. The DA sort of jokingly called for this in the trial. So, and then I just started to think it was like this strand of the silver bullet. I was even thinking about the lobotomy, and there's like a certain way, right, that the silver bullet is like the easy answer that we think is going to solve something. It's a tool, but you don't really know, it's elusive. And once that thread wasn't at all in the first one, the first draft, but that started to be helpful and think about like the easy answer that I wasn't going to find about this county. And that sort of like thematic thread helped it to feel like there was something there that could tie together, this historic creature and these sort of modern day tragedies in this place.
So what I find interesting too, like after the process of say, writing it, which is, it's a significant, for an essay, it's very long. So there's a lot of, not like laboriously long, but it's a lot of investment on your part to write a piece of this nature, not knowing if it'll be published, but knowing you'll probably include it in your book.
Right.
But what was that process then like of trying to find a home for it after you've invested so much of your time in it, knowing that maybe it's not going to get picked up somewhere? It's like it's kind of a gamble in a sense that you're investing all that time to write something of this nature. So what was your submission process like? And then maybe how did you come across True Story as a potential avenue to publish this piece?
Yeah, it is a freakishly long piece. And I think I was having a lot of anxiety about that in the edit process. Cause at first I thought like, I've got to keep it under, 6,000 words. That's sort of like the going word count, right, for a lot of like submission places. And then it quickly just like, I just wanted to add more and more and more. And then once it was there, I like just couldn't chop it. I wanted to honor it as it was. And so I want to say, I sent it out to a few places that had submissions of up to 10,000, and True Story was the one I heard first. I think I had a sense, I might have sat on it longer and tried to think about, fiddling with different things or weighing things. But I sort of had the sense in the back of my mind, it was like May when I sort of finished it, and thought like, October's coming up. There is a real sort of Halloween peg on this, which Hattie Fletcher just like caught up on right away. She accepted it, I think, a few days really after I submitted it, and said like, can we get this for the October issue? So that was sort of helpful to like, I think one of the hard things about trying to plan submissions and thinking on a print scale when I'm used to like often submitting things on a digital scale, right? Is you're trying to always think this far out in advance. So it did seem like a sort of lucky, like I did like the idea of it having a specific peg. And then it was like once True Story, which I'd heard of before. I'd heard of one story for fiction. I'd sort of heard rumors that there was this nonfiction equivalent, and it just started feeling so 100% like the perfect place for it, to not have to chop it down or make it more. I would be able to maintain the balance of like sort of essayistic rumination with more narrative journalism, and that felt really appealing. They were really open to that whole balance, and the True Stories have that real range, and so I felt like I was going to be in good company.
Yeah, it's just the form is really cool. It's just its own little chapbook. It's got to be like, It's just that I just love the form, and I love that you can tuck it into your back pocket, and it's by itself. It's its own thing. It's your issue for your
Right.
month. It's sort of like you're the headliner. So it's what was that moment like when they greenlit it? Oh, when you got that email?
Oh, it was great. I was actually on a writing residency in the sort of cabin in the woods in Wisconsin. Felt a little bit, or sorry, not Wisconsin, Washington, but dealing with my own like feelings of hauntedness over there. And then this was just this like really exciting thing because I felt like I'd written out of, you write out of your own sort of just trying to make sense of something. And when someone else, like when it clicks for them and they're like, oh yeah, like what you're trying to make sense of is helping me make sense of something. Anyway, not like Hattie said that directly, but it was awesome. And yeah, no, I was really, really honored and thrilled to be there. And I think I thought of the piece too, almost, I mean, I listened to a lot of like podcasts or I just like been watching Grizzly Man. I'm not really sure what the specific pegs, but I did feel like the piece was immersive in a sense, like where you're going into somewhere, living in this sort of subculture and then coming out of it. And I appreciated that, about what this form would do. It wasn't going to be tucked in a magazine with other pieces, which I mean, I love reading stories like that. Don't get me wrong, but like I appreciated that someone might just like sit down in an armchair with just this and like be able to dwell in that mind space, which I think is the beauty of this form too.
What's your so to date what you would consider your crowning achievement for publishing? Would you say it's this piece, or is there something else that really resonates with you more?
I think, I was just thinking about this when it did come out, and I do feel like this piece is closest to the type of writing that I feel most at home in, blending these different sort of arms of journalism and retrospection and historical research and all of that. And so, yeah, I think this is like, I've certainly published other things I've been really pleased to have an audience for and like have gotten really helpful responses from people. But this piece feels like where I want to be going. So, yeah.
So you say the writing that you feel most home in. How did you develop and cultivate this current taste in your reading and your writing that this is the stuff you want to do? What were the sort of what's the road that led you to this area, this sort of genre of not true storytelling? I
wonder how many of your guests say this, but like I was all poet back in the like middle school, high school days. I think nonfiction I thought was really boring. I didn't read it. I mean, I read journalism a little bit, maybe, but probably not even. Like I was just a kid that liked stories, and then I also liked poetry because I was obsessed with language. And I didn't even know creative nonfiction existed, as most of my students don't know. And then I sort of in college was like still pursuing poetry, but was pivoting and like doing journalism and meeting people that were journalists. I was like, started editing our paper and like feeling a real rush of that. Like I ended up really liking going in interviews, and I liked the like energy of trying to process something more lifetime. And, a poem has a very different pace. And so while I was really, really grateful and like for the ways it had attuned me to the language and sort of the buildup of images. And I really credit a lot of my poetry instructors with like helping me be able to like string the themes of a lyric essay or of a more narrative essay. And then I credit the journalism with like getting me out there and like not making me as freaked out to like just call someone on the phone or to like chase someone down. But I also knew that wasn't the form that like excited me. I felt like that was formulaic in a way that was really pleasing and satisfying. Like, I don't know, like cooking something that you know how to cook and like it tastes good, but I wasn't like, whoa, this is really like wild and exciting. And, the essay lets you learn as you're writing. And I think realizing that I process so much of the world through writing it, and I don't always know what I'm thinking until like it's written. And I had one teacher who was teaching, basically like the great nonfiction, like we were reading McPhee and Didion, and I started realizing like, oh, this is a thing people do. I didn't know it had never occurred to me that you could sort of report with this first person voice. And that was suddenly like immensely appealing. I think I'd often been telling stories in my mind, or to my friends rather, about my own life, and I was aware that like storytelling helped you reclaim the narrative, right? If something embarrassing had happened and you were recounting it at dinner, you could make the punchline, and like that felt like a great sense of power as like a high school girl or a college person who was confused about everything, you know? So I really appreciated that sort of personal voice early on, but only later could I like see how that would merge with some of the journalism that I really enjoyed doing. And
at a young age, did you always, like at a middle school, high school, into college, did you always see yourself as wanting to become a writer?
I did. I don't think I knew exactly how possible that would mean. I mean, we didn't really know people that like were writers. Since living on the East Coast now, it's like I meet people who have friends whose parents like are journalists, or any like, you know, it's more tangible how they have books, like what people do. And, you know, in Oregon, I didn't totally know people who were writing who didn't like have a spouse who did something else who supported them, or like, I don't know, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I don't think I knew what it would mean to try to be an independent writer. But I liked it as an idea so much. And as I've grown older and sort of have seen different models of people stringing it together and making it work in different ways, of course, it's not like you're a writer if you're a full-time writer, but I've seen people like more on that side of the spectrum where you're not juggling necessarily something else full-time too. I don't think I remember like as a second grader sort of saying like, I just want to be a mother and a writer, and thought that was just like a really simple answer. So I was basically just like a little nerdy kid mom. Like, I don't know, I'm not a mother now, but it's like, it's stupid how long I've wanted to just be writing.
Who was instrumental at a young age that gave you the permission to pursue a career in writing?
Yeah, I think there was a level of like, maybe, you know, I think my parents were certainly supportive when I was like doing this. I don't know that they actually thought, you know, they were definitely pushing me to also like be doing other things, which was good. And like, I studied environmental studies in college, and was sort of like interning at nonprofits, and like thought that I would be doing, I also studied English and was doing creative writing, and like knew that was where my heart was on some level. But I think part of it was like, I wanted to prove it to the people that actually didn't think that it would be possible to really be a writer. So maybe there's some level of like that competitive edge. Not that my parents ever said like, you can't do this, but there was just a like wariness, which is good. Right. And I just always wanted to like show that I could, you know, try to do that. And I remember I had one teacher in high school who said like, not, you know, it's such a hard thing because writing, it's like a crazy career path, as you know. It's not even a career. I don't even like to think of it as a career path, right? It's a vocation that sometimes people make money from. But he sort of said some people like will be able to do this and build a life for themselves out of it. And not everyone can, but there's always going to be someone that can. And that sort of stuck in my mind, like, oh yeah, wait, there's going to be someone who's writing the pieces in the magazines or like the books that we love. And like, if you just work really, really hard, like maybe you can work towards trying to be that someone. And I think that sort of has stuck in my mind still.
Yeah. It's, to your point, it's like, if it was really, really easy, everyone would be doing it. Like these,
right.
You know, like there are roadblocks in the way that kind of vet out the people who, like, if you really want to write for the New Yorker or any of the big glossy magazines, like you really have to. I mean, there are a few chosen that somehow seem to, they're 20 or 25 and they get in there, and it's just like, you know, if you're coming from a different mindset, you might like want to pull your hair out. You're like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
And all this. But the fact is, you know, there is a tremendous amount of rigor, and you need a lot of patience and endurance to reach those levels of publishing. You need to have that slow burn. So I wonder how have you approached that nature of hustle and rigor and patience to maybe see yourself fully realized and a more visible, and also as a way of making a living?
Yeah, I was just listening to a long form podcast with Ta-Nehisi Coates where he was sort of quoting David Gran, who'd told him, or David Carr, I guess, saying like, yeah, you just do this long enough and then it's like the pool gets narrower because more people drop out.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a long distance runner because I drop out, but this is the closest that I could think, like, keeping that little spark alive of like not getting beaten down by any rejection. I mean, I think dealing with rejections is one of the most disconcerting. It's like you're getting rejected from things that would have paid you maybe, $150 or maybe more sometimes. But it's like, there's just a futility if you think too much about it where it's like, oh my God, what is this? But I think just the really like incrementalness of it. I saw Mary Ruffle speak yesterday, who's essayist and poet, and she was saying like she thinks patience is the top thing a writer can have. And I think part of that is like I set low but steady goals for myself, I would say. Like at the beginning of the year, it's like, okay, I want to write one essay that I'm proud of and I want to publish one thing. Like I did sort of have a sense that while my writing is a personal, it's like I do it for myself and I do it to process the world, and it's not mediated by, say, publication, my sense of success. But I also am aware that like, right, publication is how you get an audience. It's how opportunities open. Like it's always hard to hold those two things, especially when you're young or trying to make sense of this. And so I think like setting goals and realizing that my goals in those two fields are different. Like, okay, I do want to publish an essay. I also want to write something I'm really proud of. And like, those are different goals maybe. But I have them both. And it's not like I need to publish this essay in the New Yorker or anything. It's just this sort of like incremental, as you say, and like holding yourself responsible for those goals, I think, and realizing like, I'm always inspired when I hear about people like tacking up their rejection letters or keeping track of what hasn't been placed. And it's like, I can look at my submittable account and see all of those, declined or rejected from a few years back and think like, I'm so glad that I didn't stop then, And I think it's just that level of like self-competition and also competition with, there's a certain sense of like, a lot of other people that I do see. I mean, I think like Twitter is really good for this. You see other people who are writing cool things and you sort of, when you come across someone in a magazine, their name, it's just this little byline and it's sort of like the person is hidden. And on Twitter, you see the person in a little bit more fully formed way and you see what they're writing. And that's like the really healthy, good competition, I think, which I don't even know if competition is the right word, but it's a sense of like, we're a community and we're fighting for this thing, the written word, right, in our crazy world. And that feels really inspiring. And I'm like often motivated by just being in communities of writers like that.
How do you navigate that line between being like, that, to use the term competitive, like that can be really toxic and like jealousy forming, or it seems like you found a good balance of maybe just using, not being competitive, but seeing those other people as not opponents, but actually advocates in a way. Like, oh, they're doing that kind of work. That means eventually I can too, instead of that zero sum game. But like, oh, they did that. That means I can't. So if I can do it, no one else can. Like, how did you figure that out for yourself so it doesn't feel zero sum? It actually feels more opportunistic instead of competitive.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's hard. I think growing up, I felt like I had competitive relationships with like my high school friends who I loved dearly, but like we were competitive and writing wasn't the seat of the competition, but it definitely soured me to the ways that like, being friends or being friendly was also often in tandem with this like competitive or layers of resentment or something. And I have been like consciously aware of feeling really like put off by that now. And I think the sense too that like the literary world, there's all these different circles, right, of who reads what. And, maybe, for example, like some big piece that comes out in the New York Times Magazine is going to be read by a wider circle than a piece that comes out in like a literary journal. And feeling like, okay, but those people who are up there sending out the big pieces, like that's going to get my maybe if my aunt and uncle in Montana read that, they're going to be excited and like feel more accessible to then pick up this X or Y other piece. And just feeling like, we're all just trying to, not that we're fighting like screens or, any of the other distractions, but I do think that like any things that are happening in the literary world to some degree are helping everyone else who's in that world just like get out and get someone's attention and like, fight for sort of space in this world. And on a person to person level, I think that having friends of different generations or different, like even different sort of fields of writing, like it's very helpful. In my MFA program, I'm sort of working very closely with both poets and novelists or short story writers, fiction writers, and like sort of comparing, like we all are sort of figuring out our own sphere of the writing world in different ways and like being able to talk about those things, but then also like being friends with people who are older and who have come at writing from a different, through the like magazine glossy heyday of the 90s or whatever, 80s. And like, it's helpful to just have those different points, because I think there is something when you're young and just like there's a real chomping at the bit excitement to like get out there, and that can feel like you lose perspective pretty quickly if that's the only people you're talking to.
And when it comes to the writing process itself, what part appeals to your taste a little more, like that generative phase or the rewriting and editing phase?
I love the generative stage because I love the connection making. I was just reading an interview with David Legault, who was an alum of my program, who just wrote a book about sort of obsessive collectors. And he was saying that like, an essay, you're drawing connections between disparate things. And a lot of that happens through like research and picking up little scraps of like physical memorabilia, good quotes, like observations. And I feel like that sort of like collaginess is really appealing to me about writing. I write very slowly and tend to edit as I go. So then I'll finish a draft and think like, okay, this is kind of solid. And then of course it's not like the next morning you're like, oh my God, there's so many holes in it. And then I end up just like putting it away for a while, if I can, and then a week or whatever later, it's like you can come back and cut into it a little bit more. And then I think I find the pleasure in the revision for sure. And it's like, it gets easier and easier to kill your darlings for sure.
What do you feel like you struggle with personally with the work and generating work? Well, what's a point of weakness for you that you find yourself always trying to improve upon?
I personally just have a hard time because there's so much generative excitement that comes from like drawing the constellation of ideas together in my mind. It is hard to plot out exactly where I know something is going. And I think sometimes, I don't want to do that. I think often essays that know exactly what they're going to be at the end, like you can tell as a reader, and sometimes that's not as exciting. It's not always true, but I do want to be a little bit better about being able to like visualize on the grand scale sort of what I'm going into, or to know when to be able to do that. Right now, I sort of have this big pad of newsprint, and I'll write these sort of like webs of associations. And, I want to be able to like plot that a little bit more, which I think helps if you're like writing something on spec, or you've written a pitch for something and you want to deliver something specific, and you want a sense of that flow. And I'm always trying to get better at like reading other pieces, trying to figure out the scaffolding that made those pieces successful. And then like think about how do I build my own scaffolding before I start writing? Because often I'll write a lot and then like overlay the scaffolding or something, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, that definitely does. I know like, you brought up John McPhee earlier. Like he's the big proponent of really setting up the scaffolding beforehand, and he will labor on that structure element before he even starts writing. So yeah, there's that element. Is that something you want to improve on? Like you would like to see more scaffolding before you start writing, and maybe sort of paint yourself into a corner that you don't want to be in?
Yeah, I mean, I admire him so much for the way he talks about that craft. I think I'm torn between feeling like a lot of the pleasure, you know, of the actual writing for me, the writing process comes when I'm like knee deep in a scene that I'm writing and I like have some realization and I can like go down that rabbit hole. And so I guess I'm sort of in between of two minds where like I want to be able to do that, I think. And I had a advisor in college who like would have me read books and then like plot them and send him these plot diagrams, and then he would say like, you didn't do this, do it again. And it frustrated the heck out of me, but was probably helpful, definitely helpful. But at the same time, I've appreciated now that like, okay, maybe the first draft of something. Right now I'm working on a piece that is a similar sort of immersive piece to the werewolf one. And I know that my first draft, which is right now like 12,000 words, it's way too long, but I needed to write a lot of those scenes to like build the connections and like see different themes rise. And I'm just aware that like now I'm going to do some of that scaffolding and that feels fine. I think, I'm sort of at peace with that in some way too. So I want to be able to do both and be able to trade off between them, we'll say.
What would you say are a few books that you reread over and over again? I like to call some these books like they kind of remind you of like why you do this, or they're keys that unlock these doors that you want open in your own work. Like, what do you revisit for that kind of inspiration?
Yeah. I love the way you worded that. I think that's totally true. I think, I think about like John Jeremiah Sullivan's Pulp Head, or actually the same day that I bought that, this was like a while ago at Powell's Books in Portland, I bought that book and a Susan Orlean collection of profiles. And there's something about both of those books that like make me just so excited and curious about other people, which is where so much of my drive in this writing is just like wanting to get to know people deeply and like try to understand them and thus the world. Right. And like those books are like, I'll still go back and flip through them and just like get excited about that whenever I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm writing or need some sort of idea. Hearing their language and excitement about that they bring to other people is really helpful. But I think formally, like Eula Biss's Notes from No Man's Land, these incredible like associative essays that totally expanded my mind of what the essay could do. And again, scrupulous research, reporting at times, but in a very like lyrical way. And I think on that same boat, like Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts, or the Empathy Exams, which I mentioned earlier, like these books really changed in this sort of like post-adolescent phase where I was like realizing that creative nonfiction was a thing and trying to figure out what it was. Those books were the first ones I read. I guess I would throw Didion in there. She has the memoir Where I Was From. That is, it's a memoir, but it's making sense of the West and its mythology. And I felt like that was a lot of what I was trying to do. I'm like very interested in sort of the mythopoeia and how we like the myths that we make, right, on a family level, a personal level, a cultural level, a national level. And she's reconciling a lot of those in that text. So that was a book I looked at a lot through the years. Yeah.
What other artistic media do you use to maybe push the boundaries of what you know?
I definitely really appreciate reading fiction and poetry right now. There's this whole sort of like canon, right, of fiction that feels like it's moving in what I would think of as sort of essayistically. Valeria Luiselli, I'm reading Renata Adler's Speedboat right now, Jenny Ophil's Department of Speculation, a book called Flights by a Polish writer, Olga Tokarczuk, probably pronouncing that wrong, but they're these sort of books that are almost lyrical essays. They're maybe told in like associative chunks of prose that look more like Maggie Nelson or something. But they're building narrative in a really interesting way. And those have been really interesting and like informative for me. I don't watch enough like TV. I think that's a real thing to be saying. Like I want to, and that's sort of my like vacation thing. Cause I think TV is so smart about plugging plot and narrative right now. And so I want to like hinge on that more. I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and especially like hearing writers talk, right? When I left college, I was living abroad in Sicily, like by myself. Basically, I was helping with a documentary, but spending a lot of time like in a pretty isolated rural place. And every day I would like go for these walks or runs and just like listen to long form podcasts. Or this was when I was sort of coming out of doing a lot of college journalism and trying to figure out what my writing life wanted to look like. And I just felt like it was this sort of like boot camp in training. And, you know, there's other writing podcasts, this podcast, there's Kill Fee, there's the New York Public Library interviews with writers. All of these were just sort of these voices. It was like my free sort of first grad school experience or something, was just like being able to binge on hearing how people make sense of this crazy life.
Would you say you're drawn more to interview podcasts versus narrative ones?
That's a good question. I totally have binged on narrative ones as well. But maybe there's something about my attention where I really like to read narrative. Like I often am reading novels, not even just the ones that are essayistic, but I love reading narrative like that. And so something about my attention span when I'm listening, I do tend to be drawn to more interview ones. Yeah.
And I find some of the better interview ones, what I like, especially for artists, are ones that get a little bit tactical, because that way, you know, it lets the listener maybe cherry pick something like, oh, I love that little habit. I'm going to experiment with that. So I'd kind of maybe extend that to you, you know, when you were writing your true story piece or anything else for that matter of late. Like, how do you set up your day so you can accomplish the kind of work you'll be proud of at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I had a professor, Sam Friedman, who's a journalist in New York, who's visiting, and he was always like, coffee and inspiration, that's the move. And I do think that's totally true. Like I do drag myself out of bed try to be around 7 or so. I kind of aspire to be the person who does that earlier, but I'm not good enough about going to bed early. So like get up and just like start reading something that's getting me excited about the written word right away. Sometimes that's like poetry or essays, or, you know, if I read the news, like that doesn't count to me. Like I love to read something like that, but that's like a different sort of thing. And then I sort of like will get my coffee and put on classical music. I've gotten really into classical music right now. It kind of helps balance the like caffeine panic that inevitably sets in, unless it's like really crazy harpsichord or something, and then I like rush to turn it off. But yeah, and I think like I do like to journal in the morning. That's sort of a more aspirational, like everyday thing. I'm not quite there yet, but I do think like, so I use Scrivener for writing, and it's just a godsend for the amount of like research and interviews that I end up usually cobbling together. And, you know, there's these settings in Scrivener where you can say like, I want to write 1,500 words a day, and I need to get to 10,000 words by November 20th or something. And then it sort of has these little bars. It's like in a video game, there's like the bars of how much food you have or whatever that's like green or red. That's exactly what it is for this. And you're just like feeding the beast of Scrivener. And that is really helpful for me when I'm having like a real writing day and knowing I need to do that. And I just bought Freedom, the app, which is amazing. I think Zadie Smith like credits it in her acknowledgments for books. And, you know, it like, I'm always on the internet for research. And that means that like, you know, I wish I didn't have to be often, but it's just a reality. And so like being able to block Twitter or the New York Times or Facebook or whatever it is really helpful and like freeing. It sounds real. I don't know. I don't like that I have to do it, but it's made my writing chunks much more productive. Yeah. Basically you set what it works on your phone and on your computer, and you set which apps you want to block or which websites you want to block. And then you can set up a daily schedule. So now I've actually sort of trained my writer brain. Like, so for example, at 8:30, it'll click on in the morning, and then I basically don't have access to any of these sort of rabbit hole internet sites until lunchtime. And then I like have an hour, and, often it's like, I'll be writing the equivalent of emails, like through Facebook Messenger, or, because those are tied up in your work, or Twitter. Like, all of those things feel like something I do want to spend some time on. It just really limits like what I would do. So then I like, for the afternoon, I have another like 4-hour chunk where I'm not going to be on anything. And it just sort of like, I'm used to that routine now. My brain works around it. In the mornings, I know that I can like get caught up immediately if like there's something going on. But then it's just time to clock out. Yeah. So I think like whenever you have I have a pretty stay-at-home work day now. I'm on campus a few days a week teaching and such, but trying to build the regimented, like, this is my free time now, because otherwise I would like work all the time, I think. And that sort of half work where like you're half on Facebook and you're like not satisfied that you're having fun and not satisfied that you're working. And I'm trying to like be better at both of those things.
Yeah. And I sometimes I feel like too that to have a successful morning routine, it helps to have like a good night routine as well. That kind of like rolls the ball uphill. That way you can just push it downhill in the morning. So do you have any nighttime rituals that help you sort of unwind but also set the bowling pins for the morning?
Yeah, I think one, I do love to read before bed and think of the like sort of omnivorous reading or omnivorous research that I'm realizing is really helpful for essays where I'm trying to make connections between disparate things. And so I'll often like read the Harper's, the section at the beginning where they have all these like sort of short, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's like, excerpts from different stories or poems or like essays or whatever. And like sections like that are so fun to read because you're like seeing really disparate things. Anyway, so before bed, I like to read something random, basically. And who knows like what sort of connections will be there. I don't believe really in like procrastinatory reading. I think like you could always get something surprising out of it. And I find that actually with like films too. If I'm watching something, that may be helpful again. But basically it's like, I just know I need to go to bed by a reasonable hour. And I have friends who like, throw in the towel and they're like, I'm done writing and now I'm up and I'm free till the day. And it's like, I'm pretty aware that if by like 11, I'm not winding down, like my morning is going to be a lot rougher the next day. So I do feel like guarding nights on some level during the week, like is really important for actually guarding the next morning too.
And I like that you journal as well. That's something I've kept a journal for over 20 years.
Oh man, a lot of journals.
Yeah. Oh, so many. And more in the last like 5 years or so, I've actually, I used to just kind of do it when I felt like it ended up averaging like every 3 days through like the first 15-year run of the journals. And then of late, I make it a morning practice. And I wonder how I have a point to bringing up my journaling practice to get to yours. Like I've struggled of late because sometimes, when you're writing your journal, you want to be sort of as honest as possible. There's no sense in lying to that notebook, but say you have like a lot of negative thoughts. A lot of times I have a ton of negative thoughts, but I feel like, is it bloodletting or is it actually imprinting? And because a lot of times the words and the stories we tell ourselves really manifest themselves. So like if you're really imprinting negative self-talk in a journal, like is it making it worse or are you purging? And I wonder is that something you experience? And if you do, like how do you sort of keep the negativity to the journal and then be positive and fruitful with your work? Or I wonder, is that something that you think about?
That's so well articulated. I don't feel like I thought of it in exactly those terms. And, when I think about the times where I haven't journaled as much, it's like in college at the beginning, I like definitely didn't have that regular practice. And I think part of that was I didn't know what the narrative was in my mind about it. Like I was uncomfortable with my own discomfort at times. about certain things. I went to school on the East Coast and like had a good experience, but it was so super, I was like in culture shock, a lot of it, and just like personal shock, and like didn't know. Journaling felt to me like I was committing to a certain emotional narrative that I like wasn't sure I wanted to. Like I was aware enough that I will go back and read journals, and like didn't know what I wanted to like feel about that time. And now I think it was sort of freeing to realize that like the journal is sometimes just a very like descriptive place for me. Like I'm just writing what things that I've seen. I'm always sort of like eavesdropping or, just trying to like have my eyes open whenever I'm outside, and like riding the bus often. I'm just like trying to take notes of like scraps of really beautiful things that I've heard or seen, outside the window, And so now I think even in my personal journal, it's like partially just if I've seen I recently like saw a friend laughing and was like, oh my God, he's like laughing like he's about to be sick. Like he holds his belly and like falls over on himself. And it was this like kind of revelation that I was like, I don't know exactly what this is helpful for, but like, it feels like an interesting characterization that maybe will come up in something. So like, I would just write about like going to dinner with a group of friends or something, but it would be like more observations like that than any like looking for any sort of deep personal, thing. And I think I'm trying to articulate my emotions. I was thinking about this right now because I like was writing a lot after the election last year, because that was such a really deeply hard emotional time, and that like trying to make sense of what the future was, for my generation, for everyone. Right. And like, I think one of the reasons why I'm writing about fear right now is just like trying to figure out what we do in a world that feels scary. And I'm like scared of the world in a lot of ways, because I've had experiences that have made me scared of it. And just because like my mind works that way. And I'm also really scared for the world and like scared for other people. And like on a global warming level, it's like, what do we do with this? And I think that's the sort of like large scale anxiety that the journal sometimes becomes the home for. And just like, how do we live with all this stuff that's there? And like, how do we reconcile it? And sometimes that just comes from like noting little things. And like, I'm aware of like what the psychologists say about like, if you write down things you're grateful for, they've sort of proven that like you can fend off depression or something if you make these like gratitude lists. And so I think now I am consciously aware that like writing bad things, writing dark emotions does maybe feel like purging, but also like, I don't know, I am like looking for the other spin on them, I think, as a way of reconciling them.
Yeah. And before I let you get out of here, I'd love to go back to that time when you were in Sicily and you were listening to the podcast, and then you were ruminating about the writer you wanted to be. And I think that's probably a key moment for you. So what were those conversations you were having with yourself and maybe with other people as you were looking to turn that page to the person and the artist that you want to manifest, and the one that really gives you, fills your life with life? Like, what was that like in that moment? What was that like?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I mean, you and I are both not talking right now from like New York City, right? And I think there was always a sense of like, is that what I have to do to be a writer? Especially when I like did go to the East Coast for school, and feeling like that was where people were going for these internships or fellowships, or like I sort of had put off, like I'd never applied for any of those. I knew that I would like probably I wouldn't be able to do an unpaid literary internship or something. Like I just knew. And so it was sort of a question, I think, when I was abroad of like, what am I going to come back to? And am I going to try to go into that world? And one of the things that because like, quote, is that the only way to do it? And something that sort of crystallized out of listening to some of these people. I say talking because I like felt like we were having conversations, but it was mostly just like me in my head and thinking that, I could do this and I could go somewhere else, or I could be living in the mountains somewhere and still be finding stories that were interesting. And like the internet is really good for that, like allowing that to happen. And I think started to free me into thinking about like, there's not one path that this needs to be, but like the constant is just going to be that I'm going to like work really hard and not ever take anything for granted in terms of like, that's sort of the dispiriting thing is you talk to people who have a lot of books out or who have been freelancing for 30 years and they're still like a sense of insecurity because that's what this field is and that's what their path is. And like just accepting that that's going to be something. And I like can't think about it too macro level, but keep thinking like, I mean, you do think about it hypothetically macro level, but really just being like methodical and sort of plodding forward and like having some sense of quiet faith. And I mean, again, this sort of like competition or whatever that other word is that just is like, if all these people are doing it, like, I think I can try to do it too. And I can try to like put myself, right. Like, try to emulate things that I like reading to a certain degree. You don't want to do that straight up, but, like maybe that's just how you move forward in this sort of thing, being inspired.
Great. And Erica, where can people find you online?
I am on Twitter at Erica J. Berry, and my website is www.ericaberry.com. My dad is like a big old tech nerd, and so he reserved the domain back in the day. So I guess I needed to do something with it. I don't know. It was hanging over me in elementary school.
I'm picturing like 15 years ago, like you saw the first GoDaddy ad during the Super Bowl, and it's just like, you know what? I'm gonna save this for her.
I know, it's weird. So bless him. Now it's there, and I am always putting more links on it. So
fantastic. Well, Beast Among Us was so good and a great. It's the first time I've been introduced to your work, and I'm a fan, and I can't wait to read what you've got coming next. And when your book comes out, we'll have to have you back on the show, and we can dig into some fear a little more.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. It's such a pleasure to be in such good company on your podcast, and it's been great to talk to you.
Thanks so much. All right, Erica, we'll be in touch. Thanks again.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. That is it. Thanks to Erica for her time and her insights. If you head over to brendano'mara.com, not only will you see show notes for this episode and every other podcast, but you can also sign up for my monthly newsletter where I give out book recommendations as well as what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. Once a month, no spam. Can't beat it. If you've made it this far and you valued the show, please subscribe and share it with a fellow CNFer. And even leave an honest review. It doesn't even have to be a nice review. Just something short from your brain to the benevolent podcast overlords at Apple. I'll be right here next week for another episode of the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. I'll see you then. Happy Thanksgiving.